Everyone for coming on this day close to the holidays. We wish you all a very warm and wonderful break from the complications of the world, of which we hope today will be one. My name is Paul Pangaro. For those of you who don't know me, I'm president of the American Society for Cybernetics. And it's a wonderful moment to celebrate the extraordinary mind and work and personality of Annetta Pedretti, who I feel is a great figure in the history of cybernetics and not well known enough. And we hope that this is a new groundswell of interest and energy toward Annetta, although you'll be hearing about many others as well. I met Annetta for the first time in a Mini Cooper owned by Gordon Pask, being driven at high speed. He was in the back seat with Ranulph Glanville, which was quite a challenge because Ranulph was large and the Mini Cooper was small. We were on our way to a cabaret in Chelsea, in London. And after a night of watching Gordon's prior collaborators in cabaret and musical theater and so on, we drove to Annetta's house. And I still remember it vividly, although it must be 40 years ago. Extraordinary time, a house that seemed to be under construction and yet continuously being remade in its own form. I had that sense of it. But then met her many times at conferences where often she would produce one of a number of books, often in real time. This is the one I remember vividly in 1984. This was a conference proceeding made during the conference itself. So we would fill out pieces of paper and questions, and we would aim a question at someone else. I aimed one at Pask, I aimed one at Maturana and at Mark Sullivan. And in the course of the conference, this was made. You walked out with one of these because of Annetta's extraordinary effort to publish books. This is the series that I cherish called the Princelet editions, named after Princelet Street, which is where she lived. And enough can't be said really about her mind, her work here in the cybernetics of language, in which she takes on Wittgenstein, second order, the nature of language.
I don't know that one.
Glanville. This, I think, was fundamentally her thesis. Originally, it's just amazing. Let me just read the opening line. First of all, she quotes Wittgenstein: "What we cannot speak about, we must pass over in silence." And then she says, "There appear to be no bounds to the things we can speak about. We can even speak about, quote, what we cannot speak about." And with that, I'll let others speak in honor of Annetta.
Thank you, Paul. I'm Jude Lombardi, and I am one of the orchestrators of this event that was stimulated by people in London and coordinated with Dumani and Ben. And Ben, would you like to speak a little about how this, give us a context for how this emerged?
Sure, thanks, Jude. So hi everyone, I'm Ben, and the context for this meeting comes from Annetta's house. And Annetta's house was donated to a foundation called the Edith Marion Foundation, which is a Swiss charity which aims to prevent financial speculation on land and real estate. And it was taken over by that group, and it's being worked on by a group of designers called Assemble, who are a very innovative and well-known practice. And we've got some members of Assemble in the audience tonight. And as part of that project, I and Dolmini became just involved in some of the conversations. Dolmini and I are both in we're both from the world of architecture and from the world of cybernetics, and Assemble were interested in connecting their work in and on the house with Annetta's cybernetic thinking. And being sort of asked about that, I didn't meet Annetta. Domini and I had the idea that to sort of help with this or respond to it, it would be good to increase Annetta's footprint, if you like. And a way to do that would be to have this event to surface some stories from people who knew Annetta in order to make her ideas, to discuss her ideas and share them with other people. And so Dolmini and I have been meeting with Jude for a few weeks just to kind of develop the idea for this event, and we're really looking forward to it.
Thank you, Ben. And what I'd like to do now is have each of the people who are, I'm going to say presenters rather than participants, because I'm hoping everyone here today is a participant, say a little bit about themselves in relation to Annetta Pedretti. And then we are going to have a movie, 11-minute movie, to share with you all that has been made by Nick Seaton, who is connected to the group in London, Assemble. And I think you'll be happy to see it. And then we will have a conversation for about 45, 50 minutes. And then we will open it up for general comments and conversation. Okay? Okay, so Larry, introduce yourself, please.
Yeah, I'm Larry Richards. I was president of the American Society for Cybernetics between 1986 and 1988. I think I first saw Annetta at a Society for General Systems Research conference. I didn't meet her at that time. That was in 1980 in Toronto. But I was asked to organize in 1981 the first meeting of the American Society for Cybernetics since 1974, a 7-year hiatus. And want to be sure that Annetta was invited, having just seen her briefly. We made a connection at that conference, which I can talk about later. But over the years and up until about 1997, when I went to London, visited her at her house, she would come to most of the conferences, and was challenging and a delight. But thank you.
Thank you, Larry. Here are Susan Parente, please. Are you there, Susan?
Do you hear me now?
Yes.
Good.
Hi.
Right. Hi, my name is Susan Parenti. I'm speaking from Urbana, Illinois. I'm part of a group, I'm part of a few groups, as I'm sure we all are, called the School for Designing Society. And it was in the context of, and also the Performers Workshop Ensemble, in the context of these two organizations that I and other people that are part of either the ensemble or the school would go to many of these conferences. That's where I first met Larry, generally under the shepherding and the encouragement of Herbert Brün, who would say, this worth it, let's go. And for us, going meant going into a big van that would hold 8 of us, driving all night. I remember a situation where we were driving all night and it was clear that the luggage was falling on top of the driver. So Annetta stopped us all. We were in a high mountain and said, we need to rearrange the luggage. And then she did this fantastic magical job of taking too many suitcases and too many people and putting them compactly. Okay, so with Annetta, I tried to work out, I mean, we were friends. That's what I think of ourselves. And with Annetta, to be a friend with Annetta meant you'd be willing to stay up all night. And you'd also, when she would go to a conference, a lot of times she'd like to come back with us to Urbana, 12 people now in a small van. And then she'd like to stay. And the staying would not mean just 2 or 3 days neatly manicured. It would mean months. And it would mean staying up all night. And I think of one of the other occasions where we stayed up all night was when we did house theaters. And we would have a way of the day before the house theater was supposed to start, we decide that the whole thing was crap and that we needed to rebuild the entire 90-minute performance. And then it'd be midnight and we'd order coffee and pizza and we'd stay up all night. And I just wonder how many people are willing to stay up all night. we're in the stay up all night time period, I think, in humanity. So with Annetta, I was trying to work out a way to bridge the gap between my horror at political structures and my love of music. I had gotten into music, my doctorate's in music composition, in order to stay away from politics. I don't know if other people have gotten involved in something in order to turn their back on something else, but I did not want anything to do with logic structures or political action. I just wanted to do music. I think I would have been better at political action than music. But to make this very briefly, I had ironed out finally, year after year, trying to understand why the people I knew and respected, like Jeff Glassman, like Larry Richards, like Mark Ensign, like Carol, though I met her a little later, like Herbert, why they were constantly saying music and political action. I just did not want to get near what political action was. This is in 1970, 72, 74. War, racism, etc. But the friends I knew were committed to making a difference politically, and I respected them for that, but I intellectually couldn't figure it out. I finally did figure it out, and this is the end of my bit here. I came up with this word, to apply. It's not a very fancy word, but I thought, okay, supposing I study the structure of capitalism, and I try to apply that structure to a bunch of pitches. And then from the point of view of music, I could interrogate the political structure. But the important word was I wanted to apply political structures to music and musical structures to politics. I came to London, I think invited by Annetta. I think we were going to spend 2 months staying up all night or something. And I told her this big discovery around the word apply. I expected her to kind of go, nice girl, Susan, or good job. I don't know why I thought that, but I thought she'd at least agree, because she was writing huge stuff about language and its power and political structures and things like that. Instead, she flew into a rage. Do not use that word apply. It was like, it seems so innocent a word. And I couldn't understand it. I was like, well, but that would enable me to the domain of political action and the domain, and I could apply. Don't use that word. No. So that was a day where we did not stay up all night, where I went to the right and she went to the left. I got on some kind of tram in London and then went back to my little room and fumed. I didn't see her and talk to her for months. At this point, I probably should have done my research and checked into why she had such a bad reaction to apply, but I never found that out. Someone, I think Larry was commenting that she had written like a 120-page paper against the word apply. But I do not anymore use the word apply. Thank you, Annetta Pedretti.
Thank you, Susan Parente. Gerard, Cial, please.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I started in the university. My name is Gerard de Zeeuw, by the way. I'm at the moment in the UK, but I used to be in the University of Amsterdam. And when I came into the University of Amsterdam, I noticed that there was an incredible surge of creativity in a number of areas. So there was operations research, there was decision making, there was cybernetics, there was systems theory, and they didn't organize themselves all at the same time. But the people who were there, and I still remember, were all extremely creative in working on something that I thought was a similar problem. It was the problem of engaging a certain aspect of humans, which is that you can make plans, that there is a purpose, that you can look into the future rather than only into the past. I had been trained in mathematics and statistics, where in statistics, at least, the past is extremely important. So for me, that was an incredible period in which I could engage with many different types of groups. None of them actually was the most important to me, although I have established certain organizations in system theory. The main point to me at the time was that in the process of developing all these different approaches to solve, to engage with a certain type of problem, none of them actually could fully engage with the problem. Something was left. There was always the possibility for another type of discipline apart from cybernetics and others. That is the type of thing that eventually got Annetta and me together. I met Ranulf Glanville in 1972 in Linz. And as far as I remember, at the time, he had a relationship with Annetta. So that's how I got to know her. But it wasn't the time that we were engaging. That only came later when Ranulf worked in Amsterdam in my faculty, as well as Gordon Pask, and she came also. And we had a series of interesting conferences, the problems of agency, the problems of cybernetics, and so on. And that's the time that we really started to talk about these, our interest in that which none of the different approaches that had developed after the Second World War actually engaged with the final element of what they tried to engage with. So we always could discuss things that were outside of the formal system. And I will go into that a little bit later, but that's how I remember Annetta, a willingness to step outside everything that other people were trying to fix, to converge into, and to make into a system. So I'm not quite sure whether I ever discussed the word apply with her, but the word apply definitely was not in our conversation, I can find. So that's my memory. There are other memories, but I think it's for me to emphasize this element of the non-conformist, the willingness to look at, you might say, historical developments that found many different forms, but each of these forms didn't cover the whole. So that's my contribution.
Thank you so much. Sarah Weissman.
Hi. I'll jump right in. When I met Annetta, she came to Urbana in 1985, and we had talked about her in Herbert Brün's seminar for a little while. He had described her. I thought she was going to be in her 50s, based on the things that he said she had done already. And she came, she was a year older than me. She was 31. So I was pretty amazed just by that. She was all yellow. Everything she wore was yellow, including her glasses frames and her shoes. Later, when I stayed with her in London for 9 months, working on her building, we painted her window frames the same bright color of yellow. So I think that was a strong design element with her. Her parents are artists, and I think she was quite influenced by both of them. I've heard her mother read some of her work. She read it in the same monotonic way that Annetta read her memories from the memories of the next revolution.
Right.
And that was rather old device that poets have been using since the 1950s to keep from infringing on the listener's interpretation of the poem. And so she was influenced a lot by the artist's world. I didn't agree with that interpretation because you can't by a monotone prevent people's, you can't set them up for their own interpretation with a monotone. Nonetheless, I did know Annetta for a few years, and I hung out with her in Europe for a while, and got to visit her parents and get to know them a little bit, and live with her, working on her building. And so I'll have a couple stories to tell from that. Also, we helped her publish her books while she was in her Urbana. She published Designing Society by Herbert Brün, and My Words and Where I Want Them by Herbert Brün, and Map Reformulation by Lou Kaufman, and Pierre and Penny Against the Odds. She ran out of money and she needed to publish something for kids she could collect some money on. So that's it.
Thank you, Sarah. Mark Enslin.
I was a student of Herbert Brün and composition at the University of Illinois. I was in the same seminar that Sarah just mentioned. Susan and I had started a performance ensemble called Performers Workshop Ensemble. And I remember Herbert coming back from that conference that Larry had organized, talking about Annetta Pedretti. That was maybe one of the few names he mentioned. He had been really struck by meeting this person at that conference. I first met her at the Philadelphia conference, where that book that Paul showed earlier was created. And so some members of the ensemble and students decided to pitch in with her in creating this book. So at the beginning of the conference, she addressed everybody and said, over the next 3 days, we are going to write a book. And my jaw dropped, and I saw how she had prepared that could happen. Garrett, I understand that she did a couple of things like that with you the years before that. And then over the next couple of decades, she would visit where I was and where the groups were and intertwine with us. And so she would come along with some of our performance tours. The group had a half-year residency in Germany, and she showed up there. She would come to Urbana, participate in protests, and then also I, along with Leslie Olson, visited her at the building for a couple of weeks in London. And while there and talking with her, I learned all sorts of things. And part of that experience was that she did a lot of things. And what takes a while to understand is that she was also not doing a lot of things. And if someone mistakenly extended what they understood from what she did into some realm that she was definitely not doing, that would draw a sharp response. And so she was bothered by things that I didn't understand why someone would be bothered by them. And her bothers were contagious in an interesting way. And so I gradually was figuring out that what she was bothered by is something that I could learn from. And I'm still working on those, still trying to understand actually what Susan mentioned about apply and a notion that she had that the language is the meta language, the avoidance, becoming allergic to cuts in film, and not wanting to have conversations have an end. These were all things that I'm still trying to learn from.
Thank you, Mark. I too knew Annetta, and I'm going to leave it to the movie that I'm going to share with you now, which is 11 minutes. And we're going to turn off the recording because we don't have permission to share this other than during this educational event. So what we will do now is watch an 11-minute piece that was created by a guy named Nick Seaton, who is a student, or was, I don't know if he's graduated yet, at the London School of Film, in conjunction with the Londoners in Assemble. So here we go. So I'm going to share my screen. For me, three things emerge. These three themes emerge. One is weaving and threads and fabrics, and the metaphor of how to play with that and when is it thread. And another was time, and I hope we'll talk a little bit about that, her idea of Clockworks Larry and others. And thirdly was her circles in language, me, you, us. And Sarah, you made mention of that as a monotone, but I mean, I listened to her in that tape and I think Stein, and she was a fan of Gertrude Stein. And to me, that was really the way of what Sarah was talking about, in the sense of opening a space for the listener, doing what the listener always does, which is hearing according to his or her or their history or herstory or way of seeing things. So with that, I'd like to open it up to our presenters and go from there.
Maybe Sarah could say more about this than I can, but what you don't see perhaps in this film, this is a great film, by the way, and thank you, Jude, and thank you to the producers of it.
Thank you, Nick.
What you don't see maybe is that this building, she was able to get, because it was a historical building, so they couldn't just tear it down. But it was also, it had been burned. The foundation was still good. The brick facade was still good, and the frame was still usable, but it had been burned. and I remember when I went there in 1997, after all those years, I could still smell the charred wood in the first 3 floors. She'd completely redone the 4th floor for her own living space, but this building was a challenge, and that's why I think she liked it so much. And I'd like to go back there again sometime and see what it's like now.
The part about the time and weaving and clocks and threads, it connects to an event, or let's say a composition of hers that I took part in and appreciated and have thought about a lot over years. And I'm pretty sure it was during a time when she was visiting Urbana, and the students of the university were organizing to protest the connections between the university and apartheid South Africa. And so they were trying to get the university to divest from any business that was doing business in South Africa. And I think there was going to be a march planned, and Annetta proposed and then provided for a banner, a cloth banner that would be carried in this march. And what she wanted it to be was a petition. So people would sign this banner, but you would sign it by stitching your name with yarn. And so she brought these large needles and yarn, and there was a part of the quadrangle where people were creating a shanty town as a protest of the university's connections to South Africa, apartheid. And so her thought, and then the practice and experience was, as you stitch your name in this petition, you're sitting there kind of like in a quilting bee and having conversations with people. You don't have to give all of your thought to the stitching part. And the conversation was the point of it. And various other projects she's done have that as an emphasis, the conversation as an emphasis, and this weaving, and maybe slowing something down so that this could happen. So I appreciated that was had a part in this film.
It reminds me of the book you talked about earlier, and that was sort of a weaving fabric together that ended up being the book from the ASC conference. It's another form of that, if you will.
The making of the book was the point.
Hi. Hello?
Yes.
Hi. Thank you for inviting me. My name is Brian Desborough. I know it's not come up like that on the screen, but I met Annetta around 2000 when she joined Harrow Beekeepers, and I've known her, till she passed, and I went to a funeral. But I found Annetta very industrious, very intellectual, and I really enjoyed spending time with her beekeeping and other occasions to do with beekeeping.
Great.
And I never actually went into the house because I don't think she wanted people to go in later years. And I believe when she started beekeeping, she no longer had any time to spend renovating the house. And I think that's why I understand it was in the condition it was when people first went in I think 2018.
Thank you and welcome. I'm so glad you could join us today. Yeah, Gerard.
Sorry.
I guess Gerard, your sound is not on.
You're talking to me. Sorry.
No,
Brian.
I'm sorry. I was talking to
It's okay
someone
now.
else.
It's okay
Okay,
now.
sorry.
You had unmuted me, so, but anyway. I think what comes out in the comments is something that also came out in a meeting. We had a conference meeting together with Gordon Pask and Ernst von Glaserveld in the Isle of Wight. And at a certain moment, just as an anecdote, at a certain moment, Annetta came up to me and said, I have the feeling that you are too stupid for this conference. That is a bit of a shock, of course, when people say that to you. But then she said, but I am as well, because what is being discussed here is very much in terms of the past, in terms of words that refer to what exists. But anyway, anytime you use such words, you are imprisoning yourself. So the major point that we have to identify is that words and what they refer to are gifts that are presented to us to enrich our lives. So that is precisely, I think, what made it sometimes difficult to communicate with her, because what she was bothered about was, as one of you said, things. And she wanted things to work, and she wanted things to turn into rhythms. So clearly what she had in mind was what is there, what has been created by the past, including old buildings, is not what should, what we should save and maybe restore to its original situation, but it should be a gift to us, such that we can interact with the building and create something that both the building and yourself enjoy. So in the end, I think I understood what she said about being too stupid. Sometimes you must really be aware of the fact that words should be treated as gifts, as possibilities to identify in your mind as steps to something else. So she also had this sentence, which I also like. It's not what things are, it's what things become when you interact with them. So I would like to put that as my contribution, that there was a sense that she was living in another type of way than most people were. And maybe that was also the type of criticism that she had for the meeting in white. Thank you.
Yes, Susan.
Okay, let's see. Do you hear me?
Yeah.
Good, good. All right. Well, I think what Paul is writing in the chat about making a connection between the making of books during a conference was similar to making the banner and stitching one's names. I guess I'd like to address that about the making of the books, especially. It's not only what Annetta did do, it's what she refused to do. I think that was so interesting. She refused to think that the action of a conference was inside the conference rooms. She maintained, and it made so much sense, nonsense, new sense, whatever. She maintained that the conference was happening outside the conference room. And it was where people had left the conference and were like disgusted and then bumped into someone else in the lobby and went, do you believe that shit that they're telling something? Or that somebody was discouraged and just sitting on a couch in the lobby, but not in the conference room. And that was so, that resituating where the action was something she taught and had a lot of people getting it quickly. Because that book was one of the books where people stayed up all night. I know I was in the room of the all-night stayer-uppers. And that was it was a real commitment to belong to that book because the real conference was really still going on inside the conference rooms. And like what Mark was saying about deciding that the protest was in that slow stitching while you chatted with people. Also, the guy who was making this film talked over and again that Annetta on her bike would often stop her bike in order to know how people were, that people were okay. So she kept resituating importance, and I really valued that so much. A second thing I want to say, I don't know how this fits in exactly, and it isn't meant as a criticism. Not sure what I mean it for, but I remember in the 80s and 90s thinking how cybernetics, the cybernetics of those times, was really being led by performers, people who were performers.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone that heard Heinz von Forster talk, ladies and gentlemen, that high-pitched, slightly self-mocking voice, reminding many of us that he had started his kind of career as a magician, I think. He did magic shows. Gordon Pask. How could you explain such a man? I remember seeing him wandering on the stage, seemingly lost, but then he'd suddenly turn and go, and so, and he'd be like, and others were, but it was really, I thought it was very interesting that cybernetics, you don't see it in the film. The film is emphasizing the house, and I appreciate that, but I guess because I spent very little time in that house, and I mostly always knew Annetta when she was away from that house. I just thought it was remarkable that the cybernetics was not really being led by academics. So they were always following behind, picking up the pieces. It was really led by performers. And Annetta was a performer herself. She was the performer.
Absolutely.
who needed an agent, because she would come to me, or Mark, or Sarah saying, do you know of anybody who could run the printing press? And it was like, okay, but it didn't mean just run the printing press. It meant staying up all night. You see, I never forgot that. All those nights.
Sarah knows that.
And you sort of, and it's not very respectful, sorry, Annetta, but you kind of have to pimp for her and say to your friends, there's this fantastic person, she's Swiss, and could you not just come up? And then she would do her performance, because her performance was to get collaborators and to get people to help do the work. And you can see some of us are still stunned by the amount of work she enabled us to do with her. So those are 2 points that I wanted to make. Her resituating where the action was, as we saw with that conference book, and the fact of performance really playing a role in cybernetics.
Yeah. Thank you, Susan. I wanted to add that, and Mark, you mentioned it, about her being so adamant about video cuts. And one of the things that really influenced my video making was her attitude to where do you cut or you shouldn't cut, because it was an act of violence. And so it is always with me where the cuts come and where they don't come, and am I doing justice to those in the conversation, in the video I'm working on, and how do I not violate them? And that came directly to me from Annetta, and that was really. And the other thing in regard to documenting and being a creative person in that sense, Susan, I think that there's a sense of making a video as a sort of performance, actually.
Yeah.
And that she really turned me on to the idea, don't look for answers, figure out what the next question is. That was a very cybernetic way of looking at it. What's the next question? What's the next question? So when I do go to make something, that's very much a part of, okay, well, what's the next question, rather than, oh, this is the answer. And Sarah, what would you like to say?
When you're talking about cuts, you make me realize that Annetta was a sponge. She was interested in what was going on artistically and in the designing idea and cybernetic worlds all the time. When she came to town, she met Jeff Glassman and the United Mine Workers, and they had an extensive repertoire that literally involved creating cuts of their scenes to make connections that people otherwise might not make. So I think that Jeff should talk about his interactions with Annetta a little bit.
Okay, Jeff?
Hello.
Hello, Jeff.
I'm sorry. I really wasn't prepared to say anything. I've just been soaking up everything that people have been saying and enjoying it tremendously. I think I didn't have ultimately as much interaction with Annetta as the people here who are wisely speaking up. So I feel like I'm sitting here thinking, oh man, I wish I had it to do over again so I could really get to know Annetta, but then also realizing, well, everyone's saying that that's impossible because they had a lot more time than me, and they only got a whiff of her. And also the other impression I have is that she's one of those people who stand out in my mind. There aren't very many who just don't fit anywhere in my experience. No, she opens up new territory just as a being who I know in the world, not as well as I would like to. She doesn't match up with anybody else who I'm familiar with. She's Annetta Pedretti, and that's the name of a unique position in the universe. Yeah. Anyway, I didn't make it out to the house in London, and I don't have stories to tell of Annetta. maybe back in my memory, you know, they need to be dredged up. But there was a time when she lived in the apartment in a little house in Urbana next to me for some amount of time. It was somewhere between a week and a couple months. But whatever that time was, stretched and compressed. And during that time, there was always a printing press running. I never understood how that thing worked.
Sarah.
I didn't really know like what she was making on it, but it was going all the time. And the little apartment was filled with smoke all the time, and people were coming and going all the time.
Sounds exciting.
Huh?
Sounds exciting.
It was like, you know, it was like the boiler room of some huge ship that she was steering. But anyway, so that's, I don't have much to add. I'd really like to make sure lots of other people talk so I can listen. I'm a better listener than talker. But so much, you know, whatever I absorbed of Annetta through conferences and things influenced me a lot, and more than I can recognize at this moment. And other people are helping me to recognize that. So I appreciate what you're saying.
Well, I'd like to ask the gentleman that knew Annetta through beekeeping or bee sorting, if there was one. Hi, where is he? Is he still here?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Tell me your name again, sir. Brian?
Brian Desborough.
Brian, are you a beekeeper yourself?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, I'd like to ask you what one thing that she did that was unique in relation to her beekeeping or bee sorting.
Well, Annetta had her own way of beekeeping. She loved bees and she looked after them. She was not conventional. She was, she built a round, a small round dome, and wanted to keep her bees inside rather than outside, because she felt in the climate we have over here most of the time, especially in the winter, they would keep warmer. I used to beekeep her, not all the time, but quite often. She'd got a problem, she'd call me and I'd go over and see her. And I was fascinated by the way that she kept her bees, and the way when she was building things like these domes, she was so industrious and so creative. I've never met anybody like her. And listening to other people, I can see they touched me as much as they touched her all the time that I knew her. And, you know, as I say, I knew her for about 20 years. And, you know, she was really new. Whatever she did it in her way. And would listen to people, but she had a really strong personality and determination, and she would always do it her way, but would ask occasionally advice. Sometimes took it, sometimes didn't, but a very interesting person.
Yes. So I would like to open up the conversation to anyone who would like to offer something, including the current presenters, if you'd like to say something else, but anyone who's here today. And so who would like to go? Go, Susan.
Yeah, I'd like to just raise a question. I wonder what Annetta would be doing now in relation to these different realities we're experiencing, especially climate change, because she was ahead of the curve with the bees. I just wonder if we look at what we've been saying and what people know of Annetta, what she would advise us to be doing now. She would never advise, I know that. She would, what perturbation would she do? Okay, that's just a question I have.
Mm-hmm.
Love an answer.
Good question. Yeah. Someone else? like to say something?
Not sure this is a response to that directly, but I'm in thinking back, trying to remember any interaction I had with her that wasn't or didn't turn very quickly into a conversation. And she knew how to do that. And that was something I observed, not just with her interactions with me, but as in watching her with some others. That she could take almost any thing that someone said and find a way to turn it so that someone would respond, and then all of a sudden you're in a conversation about it. I learned a lot from that, and I'm just speculating. This is pure speculation, of course, but I'm speculating that this is how she would deal with these issues. That it's in the conversation that change happens.
Yes. Yeah. I'm curious, Larry. I want to ask you about, you write a lot about clocks, or use that metaphor quite a bit. And was Annetta influential in that for you, focusing on the clock?
What she wrote was influential. I'd had a long time interest in the topic of time and clocks going back to when I was a kid. My parents bought me a book called The Boy Scientist, and the last chapter of that book is Einstein's, theory of relativity. And so from that point on, time was going to be with me no matter what. But she wrote a short piece. I think you put it up on the website for a conference that was held in the early 1990s. I don't know if it was 1990 or 1991.
Montreal.
Yeah, in Montreal. Just a small sort of mini conference. It was held on the top floor. It was either the third or the fourth floor of an old building. There was nothing going on. I mean, there was just construction materials, and it was a mess, this top floor. And she came a few days early and fixed the whole place up to do this very small mini conference, about 30 people or so. She brought with her an installation. It was a video that she set up in this space. The video was, she'd put her video camera on the top of her building, looking over on another building, and just kept it running. I don't know. I don't remember how long, but for days. and so this video was just one continuous film about what was going on the top of this other building. At one point in the video, if you happen to be there, some water tower or some mechanism on top of the other building was dismantled and taken away. But this was an example of her relationship, I think, to time and to clocks. Yeah. Who'd heard of an art installation that was just a continuous running video of something that was nothing in a way, but yet she said that's something. So yeah. Yes.
Yeah. Well, Susan, in response to your question, not wanting to offer an answer, however, when I think about this paper on time that Annetta wrote, I think there might be some clues as to what she would be doing today in the midst, besides beekeeping, because I think that was very, I was delighted to find out she was a beekeeper, Brian. Being a beekeeper myself and not knowing she had gotten into beekeeping and I had gotten into beekeeping. I think that is very much a way of addressing, at least it is for me, concerns about climate change and having conversations, opening up opportunities that people love talking about honeybees, Brian, right? I mean, they do here in the States. I mean, it's something that they just really are intrigued. Oh, I hear the bees are in trouble and what's going on? I mean, it's a great way to have conversations. And but Susan, I don't know if you've read that paper, but I'd love to have a conversation with you at some point after having read that paper about the question you suggested. And I also want to make a point that this is a beginning for the Londoners and others. This is just the beginning of hopefully a thread of a conversation about Annetta's work and life and future. Because I think, Brian, we still can get to know Annetta. And I think that that's one of the beauties of what her family has done by finding people to continue her legacy in a way that I think she would, not that she wouldn't disagree about some of the factors. I'm sure there would be plenty of that. Otherwise, it wouldn't be conversation.
My answer to Susan's question is reformulation of the question into what would we do if we were us in the current time?
There you go.
And taking Annetta as input. I love the House of Annetta. I follow it on Instagram.
Isn't it great?
From over in Illinois, I just the hints of things that I see that you all are doing, I think that is it's really heartening to see that happening that way, because I get from it that you're carrying forth this notion of openness. The feeling that the building was a disaster area, I think she maintained it that way in a certain way. She was remodeling it as slowly as possible. I think because the City of London, part of it was the City of London was helping her do that, but also that the building was an invitation. It was unfinished. It was a promise of something to do, or instigation to do something. And also her book projects, she called them living books. And there were some that were explicitly, this book is one edition, and then later editions are supposed to incorporate more material from readers. And in some ways, I still think of that as an idea. I don't know how much it's happened, but Sarah mentioned Pierre and Penny Against the Odds.
I would love to see that book.
Well, there it is.
I'm seeing it. I would like to have read that book. I mean, that brings up the question, can we get Annetta's book still?
I've been visiting my mother, who's dealing with, maybe I'm dealing with dementia. Carol and I go there every week. And I read this whole book to her last week. And it starts off with a preface in which Annetta describes the story of her being in Urbana at a book materials shop, shopping for paper, runs into a teacher from a nearby town who says, "Oh yeah, my students thought of a book, heard about a book, but they can't find it. They don't know what it is." And Annetta said, "Really? There's a missing book?" And so somehow she and this teacher get into this project where Annetta's going to this nearby little town to visit these sixth graders to write a book together. And they have these fascinating chapters, and it seems to be a mystery, and every single chapter evaporates. There's no mystery by the end of each chapter. And here's my mother, who doesn't remember exactly who I am all the time. At the end of each chapter, she goes, "That's it? That's it?" So there was another notion of time, which is in the moment, that somehow she can get to. And I'm learning from that.
It's cool. Very cool.
So what would we do if we were us?
I think we're doing it.
Okay.
I think Lou wants to talk.
Yeah, I'd like to add an anecdote. I used to visit Annetta a lot at her house, and one of the things that I learned immediately in those visits was how to climb a ladder, because I'd always been afraid of climbing ladders, and you couldn't get to the fourth floor and talk all night without climbing that ladder. So it was necessary, and then there. As Susan said, and others have said, there were these places where she would sharply make a discrimination that you weren't necessarily making. And we used to talk about laws of form. And and you may know that in Spencer Brown's way of thinking, forms can come together adjacently and form a new form, or a form can take itself as its own argument and disappear. Well, that one, she couldn't take that. That was hierarchy for her. This is a hierarchy, and it couldn't be allowed, so that she could only talk about laws of form from her point of view, from the point of view of the calling and not the crossing. And I don't know that we ever resolved that issue. Or I don't know that I ever resolved that issue, but it occurs to me that it has to do with being able to climb ladders.
Whoa.
Or doing away with them. And that calling thing reminds me so much of the piece about turning objects into rhythms, where Herbert Brün's in the room and she's showing that recursion in the camera, and he makes a comment about calling. It's about calling. Could someone speak about her relationship with either Gordon and or Herbert? Because I never saw Annetta so happy with another human being and accepting completely. I mean, I never saw her and Herbert have an argument, which for either of them seemed impossible.
Maybe it was a perpetual argument. It's just that we couldn't notice it because it was internal to themselves. She talks a lot in her Cybernetics of Language about the observer is solitary, and therefore when observers are observing, they are of themselves solitary. Anyway, I don't have a lot to say other than that Gordon was very, very affectionate toward Annetta and she toward him, and rightly so. In a way, again, her work suggests that they were peers, and they had a lot to say to one another, and with Glanville too, who is also a kind of theorist. The more I read Annetta, especially recently, thanks to Jude and others of reminding me of her, she was a theoretician as well, and we have too few of those.
Yeah, she was. My favorite comment someone made, I think it was when we were meeting about this event, was Annetta saying to Gordon, "Could you mumble a little louder, please?"
I think in terms of what I saw with Herbert is that she was the one who gave him the idea of making books out of his aphorisms, his brief statements. And I think he was so grateful for that. So what people would know, those people that don't know Herbert very well, he would spend a lot of time in a classroom that was his class or something with these little yellow Post-its. And he would sit there and he'd be quiet a lot, particularly at times when we really wished he would get us out of some intellectual bind we had gotten ourselves into. But there, Herbert would just be very quiet. And he would be using those yellow Post-its to formulate something from the conversation. And he'd say, I'm going to probably forget what he would go. He would go, "I would like to call your attention." And then he would read this little yellow Post-it. And sometimes it would be like, "Oh, wow, that had to do with where we got stuck." Sometimes it'd be like, "What does that got to do with it?" But he had, and I still have hundreds of those Post-its. We turned them, it turned into the first book, My Words and Where I Want Them. And maybe it was Annetta who had suggested this wonderful process, was that he got a whole, I think it was not, I don't remember Annetta swarming about when we were doing that first book, but he asked a bunch of us, Herbert did, we had all those Post-its typed up. And then the idea was for us to put them in the neighborhood of something where we thought there'd be a connection.
I think they were talking about the problem of in what order to put these 600 statements. And so both Herbert and Annetta, they could have made a decision.
Yeah.
But I think together they decided to share this problem with a group of people. And so Annetta typed all these things, and I had shoeboxes of statements. Annetta typed them into that Osborne computer that was showed in the film, and printed them out. And then we had a couple of parties at my house
Yes.
where there would be a roll of printouts that, and there were something like, I don't know, 10 people involved in this. And I think Herbert had, no, they were posted on the wall, and then Herbert came through and spent a weekend reading through them and came up with 16 categories. And so then the group of people were invited to snip a statement and decide, you know, under which title this one would go. And so it was there was a collective process in ordering, you know, making a sequence for that book.
Yeah. Yeah.
Could I jump in?
Please.
Yeah, please.
Please.
Before the Post-its, those aphorisms existed on little rolls of paper stuck in Kleenex boxes that Herbert had on his desk at home. And it took Annetta a while to convince him that, hierarchy though it was, he needed to be able to share those with more people, and you couldn't share the Kleenex boxes. So that's how it ended up on the Post-its. He was probably sneakily writing on the Post-its during seminar because he didn't have time to do it other times.
Okay, that's fantastic.
Sarah.
Yeah.
Sarah.
Yeah.
Can you speak a little bit about the Princelet Editions press that took place in Urbana?
Annetta came and she didn't know how long she was going to be there, so she roomed with whoever would take her at the time. And she used her money to buy 2 printing presses and kept them in the basement of the YWCA on campus. And she would go there in the middle of the night and print things. The books are living books, which Designing a Society was one of the living books she proposed. There were conference books. There were books she published for people who had written books, like Chris Jones wrote Technology Changes, and Schlossberg wrote several books, and I think he paid her some money so she actually could live.
Nice.
And then there were the books that were like conference books of people's presentations and stuff. And then there were the conference books where people wrote during the conference and created a book during the conference. So she had a lot of different books going on, but her sense of book was a lot more dynamic than most people consider a book, even though we get very enthralled with our books.
Mm-hmm.
She also liked to go to book fairs, and she wore her smock with pockets in it that she could hang her books in, and she would hawk her wares in book fairs from her smock, which allowed her to see all the other exhibits, and she didn't have to stay behind a table or anything.
Yeah.
But her idea of printing was that she needed to save as much paper as possible, so she made the books small, which were also more desirable. And she figured out a pagination system that would allow her to insert the pages so that you would cut the paper in half and it fold the top and fold the bottom, and that would create all the pages for the whole book, for all the different sheets. And then she would do a design for the cover that was pretty easy. I don't know if you can see it. And she would use glue, that printer's glue, PVA, and she created a press out of slats and screws to create to hold it all together while she was gluing it. And she took it to a professional place they had a guillotine to cut the books apart, and there she had a book. It didn't take too long.
Amazing. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So,
Well, there's something Elena has put on the chat.
okay.
Elena, would you want to read it, what you've done on the chat?
Sure. What I said was, my impression of Annetta was that she had realized things about the ways we were in the world on a very deep level, and that these insights made it difficult to have conversations about them without frustration, as the rest of us hadn't perceived as she perceived.
Oh, that's brilliant.
Yeah.
And
I
that makes oh, go ahead.
was just going to say I have 2 examples of that. Lana, you may remember this story because Stafford told it about them being on a merry-go-round together, and that Annetta had this idea while the merry-go-round was going around, that at some point they would jump off the merry-go-round.
That's scary.
And so it came around, and I don't think Stafford wasn't too keen on this idea. But it came around, Annetta took the bar off, grabbed his hand, and they jumped. And Stafford tells a story as though he thought he was going to die. You know, that's seeing the world in a different way. And I won't go into detail here, but I think it has to do with her relationship to time and to timing. The other example, with respect to Gordon Pask, and I know some of you know this, I hosted Gordon at Old Dominion University for quite a while back in 88 and 89, I think it was. And we talked about Annetta, and Gordon had been Annetta's, I don't know what they call them, supervisor on her dissertation, the cybernetics of language. And he talks about the day that they went in to have her defend this to a committee. And he says she did everything in her power to fail. And that he was the one then that had to defend her, which he fortunately did. And they, as the committee was saying, what are we doing here? And
the new concept of a thesis defense.
What they were doing there, and finally convinced them that yes, this was really a brilliant piece of work. But then again, a different relationship to the world.
I was one of the examiners, actually.
Would you like to add anything to that story?
The main thing I can remember is that we were sitting in a cafe to have the exam, actually. And at a certain moment, well, I was the chair, I decided that she would pass. And she became extremely angry. She said, I would have liked to ask with a better committee.
Wow. Well, we are about out of time for this event. And I want to thank everyone who has commented, participated, witnessed this event. And again, I'd just like to say, I hope this is a beginning of an exploration and a connection with the Londoners at Assemble to continue to create and provoke conversations around Annetta and others. So I will leave it to anyone who would like to make a final statement at this point. Thank you all.
It's Brian. We spoke about Annetta's books. Do we know where we can get copies of Annetta's books?
That's a very good question. Pile, you want to say something?
I want to say something about the next event. So when we're finished.
Oh, okay.
Annetta, yes.
All right. Can anyone answer that question that Brian has just presented about, is it possible to get Annetta's book? Fran, please. Hi.
Thanks everyone so much. It's been an incredible hour and a half.
And you are a member of Assemble, correct?
Yeah, I'm a member of Assemble. Hello.
Okay.
There's a few of us here. Yeah, just about her books. We have a number of them. Most of the ones have been saved in front of the screen today. We do have copies of, but they're limited. So Brian, if you come to the house, like, yeah, we haven't really decided how we're going to process them, if we're going to digitize or what we're going to do with them. But yeah, if you come to the house, then we can, have a conversation about it, and maybe you could borrow some for a time and then
and Fran, if
Yep.
if the ASC can help in any way to help and continue that conversation about what we might do or whatever, and I would be open, and I'm sure I could ask the ASC about that as well. That would be wonderful.
Yeah, we would. Yeah, as you said, we're just really happy to start this conversation, and I'm sure it's going to be going for a few years. So excited to see what
Yeah,
happens.
and I would say that probably a lot of the people who are at this event today do have 10, 15, 17 copies of Annetta's books. And so, a simple way might be to send out some sort of information gathering. Which books do you have?
Good idea.
You might discover a few that, were very unusual.
That would be
That's
great.
To create
In relation to one book, this one, I believe, all the remaining copies of it. So if someone is interested in this book, write to me.
Great.
Okay. Thank you, Lou.
Lou, good to see you.
I have that one. Paul, you wanted to say something?
I just wanted to say that we should start a bibliography in a Google Doc just to know what they are. And
Yeah.
Well, actually,
can
there's a
contribute.
book, there's a little yellow book that lists them all.
That would be the place to start, but to put them online and to let people say what copies they have and what copies are available.
Yeah, that's
Art
a
is-
project to work on.
Art, that's a local file. That won't work for us.
We'll figure it out.
Great.
But also in general, as representative of the ASC, as Jude was just saying, please consider the ASC as a partner and a collaborator to doing what we're doing here.
Fantastic.
Hey, I've got a quick question, if I can just butt in. Is anybody making this conversation we're having right now into a conference book? Because I feel like that would
Feel
be
free.
thing Annetta would want.
It's recorded. Go
us to
for
be
it.
doing. And
Yeah.
if it's not already happening, then we should do it, because I know she had a really distinctive way of formatting things and all of this conversation about around the room, and maybe there's something about each individually kind of taking some time outside of this room to contribute some thoughts and then bringing them back into a sort of book that might build a further conversation, because I feel it's really beautiful that the relationships that are happening now and the connections that are being made are related to that book. And I feel like that's a thread that might build on.
Sounds like a fabric with lots of threads.
Yeah.
All right, I think it's time. Pile, you would like to mention the next event?
Thank you for everybody for this really interesting conversation. And it's so nice to see many new faces in this series. And I'm hoping that maybe some of you will want to come back. In January 16th, we're going to have Bruno Clark and Michael Hole discussing cybernetics and the Gaia hypothesis. And it will be, again, designed to be a conversation with the participants as well. Then in February, we have Tom Schulte doing a book interview with Manel Wilson on the utopia and unification of human science. And in March, we'll have Kathleen Forsyth and Paula Pangaro talking about imagination for cybernetics. So, and it goes on.
Frank's not going to do that one?
Yes. Frank
You
and
said
Kathleen
Paul
together.
Okay, you said Paul Pangaro. That's why I'm asking.
Did
I thought so.
I must have Paul on my mind somehow. It is
I don't know
Kathleen
why.
and Frank Galushka.
We're not
Okay, good.
interchangeable, but we're fond of each other. We accept the comparison. Thank you.
No, not interchangeable at all. So
No.
thank you. Please
Both
be
delightful.
welcome to come back.
And thank you all for participating, attending, and witnessing, and follow up however you would like. If people, I don't know how to do that at this moment to suggest, but I think everybody here probably is on the email list for this event. So maybe we could, Matea, some way do a email to everyone here who would like to participate in what this gentleman, I don't know your name and I don't see it on your screen, who mentioned, who are you?
I'm Louis. So I've
You're with,
I've friends with Fran and been helping where I can.
Okay.
This project.
Lulu.
Lulu.
All right. All right.
Actually, one
Now
more
I
thing,
see
Art has offered, and I can now provide a link to Annetta's thesis on the Brunel website. This was Art's idea. The link I just put in should bring
One
you
on the
to
internet.
page of the cybernetics of language. I'm not sure there's a
Right.
direct download there, but it gets you partway there.
Yeah, it is. There is one on you can access online that you can download the PDF.
If you have that link, it'd be great to have. Ah, Ben has.
I go get it right now. Thank you, Ben. Okay. Are we done?
Thank you very much, Jude. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.